and actually we don't need to have this prescriptive top 10 tips almost that everyone feels like they have to do all of them in order to sleep well. We should really be looking at our sleep and going, which are the things that we need to work on? Is it the fact that actually I do drink too much caffeine and I do think I'm a bit sensitive to it, therefore yes, I should probably cut back on it, and stop drinking it from the afternoon, but you don't have to not have a glass of wine with your evening meal, as long as you're not using it as that sleep aid. That's what the sort of crux is. It's thinking about what works for you and trying to factor it into your lifestyle. Because I think giving someone sort of 10 things to do before bed, it's like, right, I've got to spray my room with lavender, I've got to have the bath, I've got to read a book, and actually some of those things people don't actually like or enjoy. And actually what we should be doing in that hour before bed is things that you like to do. So if you do like to read a book, that is a really good way to relax. But if you don't have to do that. Pick something else. It could be drawing. Some people like colouring even as an adult. People like knitting and crocheting and things like that. It's picking what's right for you and doing that.
Welcome to the third edition of the Energise Me podcast in this current series. Gurpinder and I are delighted to welcome Lisa Artis here today, who is the Deputy CEO of the Sleep Charity. So Lisa, before we go on, tell us a little bit about yourself, how you found yourself working at the Sleep Charity and exactly who the Sleep Charity is and what they do for people.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. So as you said, my name's Lisa Artis, Deputy CEO of the Sleep Charity, and I've been at the charity now for 18 months as the Deputy CEO. Before that, I headed up a company called the Sleep Council. The Sleep Council had been around for about 25 years, though I hadn't been at the head of it for that long, because as you can tell, I'm not that old. The Sleep Council was quite a sort of more marketing promotional led body. So it was very much about consumer awareness of a good night's sleep. It was obviously promoting the benefits of it. And, it was, I suppose, just a really good sort of education body. The Sleep Charity had been established since 2012, originally as the Children's Sleep Charity, and founded by our CEO, Vicky Dawson. And as they realised they were working with children and families, and as they realised that children's sleep was obviously being changed with their sort of behavioural sleep intervention, so was the parents. So Vicky, was ready to widen her remit to kind of look after kind of adult sleep as well. Myself and Vicky had worked together for several years on all sorts of various projects, and we actually started talking about, why don't we just merge the two organisations together? We would become much stronger, a much stronger independent body. She had lots of skills around sort of training and the children's side of sleep, whereas my expertise was around kind of like that marketing, that consumer awareness. We'd done a lot with the media, with the Sleep Council, and had more of a specialist in the adult sleep side as well from that. So we merged together, and literally the charity has gone from strength to strength since then. So, we have grown. I think we've taken on 8 new members of staff just this year. So you can tell how quickly it's growing. We are sort of getting our messages out further and wider than we've ever done before. And it's going really well. My background has always been a bit more in the marketing side of things. I have a huge passion for kind of workplace well-being. So that's kind of a strong thing that I'm really passionate about. And recently I'm a finalist in an award, which is really great. So Trailblazer in workplace well-being.
Excellent. Congratulations.
Thank you. We're really passionate about what we do. We've got a big mission to empower the nation to sleep better as well. And the sort of work that we offer, we do lots of training. So we have sort of training courses from almost like quite, like initial sort of introductory modules right through to our sort of 3-day children's sleep practitioner course. We've just launched in the summer a workplace sleep ambassadors training. So this is about tackling obviously corporate well-being. And we're about to launch a mini series of adult sleep training as well. Yeah, so like just, on top of that, we do campaigning, trying to get sleep on that public health agenda, and just generating really good sleep support out there.
Yeah, because I certainly used the Sleep Council's data before when we've talked to clients about sleep, because you produced, as the Sleep Council, sort of annual surveys of sleep and the state of the nation's health, which I think Gurpinder wants to talk about in a moment, actually. But yeah, so we certainly recognise you as a trusted source, put it that way, over the years.
Yeah, which is, fantastic to hear, and that's why merging the two organisations was so valuable, because the Sleep Council had, just like you said, done lots of like survey stories, data reports, had a really good sort of consumer presence, had a really good media presence as well. Whereas the sleep charity was really big on the training and offering this almost like one-to-one sleep support in areas as well. So the two together has been fantastic.
Excellent.
Yeah, so Lisa, I wanted to ask you about sleep and how it's a major factor for our own health and well-being. And one of the things that the Sleep Council have done is that they've had the Sleep Manifesto in order to raise the agenda with the government as part of the public health campaign, which I congratulate you for. But where are we with sleep, and in the UK particularly? How are we as a nation? Are we good sleepers or not?
No, in essence, no. I'm not sure, though, that has changed much over kind of the last 10 years. I think people like to think more of us as sleeping worse, but actually I'm not sure we are. But there is still around a third of us who are not sleeping as well as we should be. And that statistic doesn't seem to change that much. So anything kind of, I think, from kind of like that sort of 30 to 40% of adults are still struggling with sleep issues. And they can obviously range from, minor issues to obviously significant ones as well. I don't know why it's not getting better. I don't know why we don't seem to take sleep as seriously, maybe as other health and well-being factors. There's so much emphasis, on our diet, on our exercise. But sleep seems to be something that we don't prioritise. And I think there's obviously lots of reasons for that as well. And I think from the public health side of things, one of the things with sleep is that it hasn't got a simple message like diet and exercise. So you can obviously say things like, eat your 5 portions of fruit and veg a day, move 30 minutes every day, to help for the exercise. But you can't tell people to get 8 hours of sleep per night, because not everybody needs 8 hours of sleep a night, but equally, you might actually want 8 hours and you can't, for whatever reason that might be. You could have children who are keeping you awake. You can have obviously a sleep disorder. So it isn't a very simple message to put out there as kind of a public health campaign. Just getting better quality sleep doesn't really resonate with people.
That's interesting, that, because in my very early days of getting involved in this subject area, I went and done a free sort of level 1 or level 2, and I think it was ROSPA sponsored workplace wellbeing qualification sort of work. I think it was a wellbeing champion that one of the local organisations was funding. So I thought, I'll go along and do that. That'll be good for the day. And me and my colleague went along, and they talked about all the aspects of wellbeing, and sleep wasn't listed. Oh, gosh, that was 9 years ago, probably 9-10 years ago. And I thought, and I was quite taken aback, actually, because we were already doing some subject in the area, and we'd already identified that sleep was a fundamental that needed to be in every piece of work we ever did with a client, provided they needed it, of course. But yes, that's quite interesting in itself, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And I think a lot of people talk about sleep being like, like the third pillar of health alongside diet and exercise. But I think it's almost like the foundation, because like we said before, you can't actually eat well and exercise well if you're not sleeping well, because that gives you that motivation to want to exercise. That helps obviously with the hormones around eating. So actually it's the base layer that we need to get right. And actually, if people maybe looked at their sleep as the first priority, the other things would fall naturally into place as well.
Well, as I said earlier with our triangle, I said before we went on the call for our triangle, is that it is right at the bottom of our triangle. It's not in a sort of Maslow's hierarchy of needs bottom slice, but we do kind of treat it like that, really. I think you're right that, it has so much impact on both the physical and the mental state that that we cannot perform, and we're all about peak performance with people. We cannot perform at peak performance if we haven't safeguarded ourselves. I like what Matthew Walker said. I think the quote was, we need to allow ourselves the opportunity to get the right amount of sleep for us, and if we're not allowing ourselves that opportunity, then kind of we've already lost the battle, haven't we?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's funny, like with obviously the COVID pandemic as well, is that what we found from some of the research that we did is that there was almost like two camps of people. So there was the camp of people who started to really struggle with their sleep because of things like lack of routines, that reduced opportunity to exercise, that social isolation, which people didn't like. But then we also had a camp of people who actually could then fit their life a little bit better and their around their work, because they weren't maybe having, say, an hour's long commute to work, so therefore could get up a little bit later in the morning, which suited their needs better. Not everybody likes to be up early in the morning. We obviously have this chronotypes of like morning larks and night owls.
Yeah.
And if you've got a night owl who has to sort of set their alarm for 5:30 in the morning because they need to get up and be out of the door by 6:30, it doesn't sort of suit their lifestyle very well, or their sleep needs. So we did find that there was obviously these two camps of people, the ones who were struggling and actually the ones who slept better because of it.
Yeah, that's interesting. That and is that still the case?
Yeah, I think actually this new obviously hybrid way of working has helped a lot of people around their sleep. You can't force sleep at the end of the day, so you can't make people have a 10 o'clock bedtime because they need to get up at 6 a.m. say. Do you know what I mean? So if you are naturally someone who's a night owl, your bedtime is naturally going to be later. And actually, if you can maybe have 3 days where you're working at home and your wake up time can now be a bit later, that's great, isn't it?
Yeah, it is, yeah.
So go on.
One of the things that I found, especially as a GP, is not necessarily saying you need to do this, you need to do that. Because like you said, it can't prescribe this, but it's kind of getting into the psychology of the sleep. Why is it important? What are the benefits? And I found that, that taking, the patient on that journey, understanding why sleep is so important, because obviously, sleep is one of these subjective things you can't objectively measure. Well, I guess you can in a certain degree on, wearable techs, but it's a very subjective thing. I've had enough sleep, I'm okay, but it's the psychology behind it. So how is the sleep kind of charity kind of dealing with that, trying to change people's perspective about the need for sleep and the benefits of sleep?
Absolutely, very much like our mission is about empowering the nation to sleep better, and with that it's about empowering people with the knowledge so that they make the right choices themselves. What we find, because obviously we work with children from kind of age 12 months upwards right through now to adults, and obviously it's much easier with parents to put like sleep routines in place for their children to sleep better, but as an adult you have to want to do that yourself. You have to want to factor in your wind down routine. You have to be conscious enough to cut down on your caffeine. You've got to want not to drink too much alcohol in an evening, and we actually don't need to do all of those things either. Do you know what I mean? So I am a really good sleeper. 95% of the time I would sleep really, really well. So, I'll be honest, and I will still have my cup of tea in an evening because it has no impact on my sleep. I'm not sensitive to it. I enjoy it. It's part of my kind of like wind down routine, having a cup of tea and a biscuit while I'm watching EastEnders or whatever, and actually we don't need to have this prescriptive top 10 tips almost that everyone feels like they have to do all of them in order to sleep well. We should really be looking at our sleep and going, which are the things that we need to work on? Is it the fact that actually I do drink too much caffeine and I do think I'm a bit sensitive to it, therefore yes, I should probably cut back on it, and stop drinking it from the afternoon, but you don't have to not have a glass of wine with your evening meal, as long as you're not using it as that sleep aid. that's what the sort of crux is. It's thinking about what works for you and trying to factor it into your lifestyle. Because I think giving someone sort of 10 things to do before bed, it's like, right, I've got to spray my room with lavender, I've got to have the bath, I've got to read a book, and actually some of those things people don't actually like or enjoy. And actually what we should be doing in that hour before bed is things that you like to do. So if you do like to read a book, that is a really good way to relax. But if you don't have to do that. Pick something else. It could be drawing. Some people like colouring, even as an adult. People like knitting and crocheting and things like that. It's picking what's right for you and doing that.
Yeah, you're 100% right. And certainly that's the way we work with clients. We offer the menu of those items, suggest the sort of things that might work for people, because it's generic. You're not, unless you're working one-to-one with a client, you can't sort of give bespoke offerings, can you? But and then help and then find the solution that works for them is what we tend to see works across all aspects of well-being, not just sleep. But you're 100% right, because that's certainly, and that's just the bedtime routine you were talking about there, weren't it? That wasn't, with a little bit of caffeine as well, but that was almost like the wind down routine. And there's so much else to it, isn't there, that like what time you exercise, and some light pollution, and particularly tech, which we could include in the nighttime routine as to what time we get off it. But if our head's clouded with all of this stuff, and I think this is an interesting thing that we see. I don't know how much you see that, how much of that sort of third of the nation that is sleep deprived, sort of UK adults stat that you mentioned earlier, how much of that do you think has been exacerbated in recent years through the onset of technology and the blurred lines between work and home and social media, etc.?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's obviously lots of factors why people don't sleep well, but that onslaught of technology has been a huge sort of determining factor for a lot of people. We have almost don't have this ability to switch off anymore, and even I and I'll be honest as well, sometimes I find it really difficult. It's so easy to pick my phone up again and have one last look through social media before I go to bed. It's really tempting to look at my work phone and check my emails, and it's not what you should be doing. So I do think, technology has got a huge blame factor, because we can't switch off. We find it really difficult. I think it's about putting boundaries in place. So, not telling people to like, from 6 o'clock onwards in the evening, you can't look at your phone again. It's actually probably going to cause quite a lot of anxiety for a lot of people. So therefore that's not actually going to help sleep at all. But it's just having that boundary, and maybe even just that 30, even, preferably 60 minutes before bed, but even if it was 30, where you don't touch your phone and you try to stay away from kind of screens, will be really beneficial with sleep. I think the thing is that the biggest sort of thing that I've come out of it is that it does have that ability to affect sleep latency, which is the length of time to fall asleep, which is where I think the biggest factor is. So it's that your melatonin, isn't it? So which is the sleep hormone you need obviously to feel sleepy. It's every time you pick up a device and have that light coming back in, it's suppressing your levels again. And it is the content you're often consuming as well. It can be quite stimulating, do you know what I mean? I mean, especially in the pandemic, if people were reading just before bed, about how the death rates have increased and, people couldn't fit into an isolation ward anymore and things like that. Is that really what you want to be listening to or hearing just before bed? It's probably not going to put you in the right frame of mind for sleep, is it? But it has a lot to answer for us, technology.
And interestingly, because we often, you talk to clients and they say, well, that's okay because I've got a blue light filter on my phone. And I'm like, no, you're missing the point. That might sort the melatonin thing out, possibly, if the technology provider's just not just saying that, or they've got some blue light glasses or whatever. But it's not going to stop stimulating your brain. And we see it, I'm sure you see it a lot with the sort of getting to sleep okay, but then waking up. And this must have an impact on that. And what sort of, with the people that struggle to sleep that you see as sort of in your data and surveys, what sort of percentage of people are struggling with that, waking up at whatever 2 o'clock in the morning, perhaps needing the loo if they're my age or older, and then not being able to get back to sleep?
It's quite evenly split, really, I think, between those who struggle to fall asleep, so that initial period of, you know, an hour or two tossing and turning and can't fall asleep, to those who wake up in the like you say, the middle of the night, what we call like the witching hour. It's usually between 2 and 4 a.m, so that sort of time, and those then that are waking too early, and really struggle to then almost fall back asleep, and I just think, well, I might as well get up now. So it is a real mix over those three, and all of them are obviously problematic in their own ways. I think the waking up in the middle of the night is quite hard for a lot of people, because at that point it's quite a lonely place to be. Everyone around you is asleep, it's quiet, you know, you're not supposed to go and start watching TV. Most people almost force themselves to stay in bed because that's where they think they should be as well, because, you know, it's the middle of the night, I should be asleep. So continue to kind of lie there for ages, trying, willing, hoping that they'll fall back asleep, and don't. And actually, we want to encourage people that it's okay to get up in the middle of the night, and even with young people as well. So we often find when we've worked with some families that, you know, if you've got a teenager who's maybe awake in the middle of the night, they don't feel that they would be allowed to get up, you know, because their parents are in bed, and if they're going downstairs and it's, you know, it's dark and things like that. But actually, staying in your bed is then making a real negative association between sleep and the bed, and that's not what you want. You want that bed to be a really positive place. You want it to be the place where people go and feel happy and know that they're going to go to sleep. So that's really important, that people almost allow themselves to get up. It's good, you know, it's okay for you to get up in the middle of the night. It doesn't matter that nobody else is up, it's absolutely fine. Obviously, just don't start, you know, drinking a cup of coffee or having a glass of wine or putting the telly on or something like that in the middle of the night.
And you talked about larks and owls earlier, you know, and you know, but that's a natural part of the teenage phenomenon, isn't it? You know, Mother Nature's been really clever to program teenagers to stay up later, get some independence from their parents, which is when we were hunter-gatherers in tribes, so that they could have the safety of being in the tribe but being not with their parents, you know. So you know, it's interesting, the sixth form college that both my older two daughters went to, that I think my youngest one will go to as well, set their school day at, and back to what you said about working from home and flexibility, they set their school day to start at 10 a.m. Because they knew that, you know, they'd get better exam results out of 16 to 18 year olds by allowing them another hour in bed in the mornings.
Absolutely. And I think there's a real sort of big campaign, and I think it's coming out of America, around this sort of start schools later, and how we should be sort of pushing that, you know, start time later, because actually they'll be more productive and they'll be better for it. Because you're right, you know, especially sort of teenagers, and I've seen, you know, I've got a teenager myself now, and she's only 14, but I've just seen even in the last 12 months how her bedtime, you know, I'm ready for bed and she's like still bright as a button. And they, you know, it's not their fault that their melatonin production, you know, is produced later on, so that they, like you say, naturally don't feel sleepy till later. So actually forcing them to have this like 9 p.m, 10 p.m. bedtime means a lot of them will just lie there because that's what they've been told to do by the parent, and not fall asleep because they can't. So then naturally, they might want to sneak the phone under the covers because they're supposed to be asleep, and they don't want to put lights on because they're going to get told off. But then they're using the phones, which then obviously impacts sleep even further. But yeah, I mean, it's great that, you know, that college has, you know, looked at that, recognized it, even realized that it could, you know, it's going to impact on performance, which is fantastic, and done that.
Yeah, and they've got the best sort of A-level performance have consistently over the last few years in the area, you know. So that's not the only thing they do, but it's probably reflective of how forward they are as an organisation to consider that. Excellent.
I mean, the other thing that I wanted to quickly touch upon is mental health and sleep. And as GPs, a lot of the time when we're talking to patients about sleep and problems falling asleep or remaining asleep, it's because of anxiety and depression and things like that. So obviously everyone asks for a sleeping tablet, you know, but what is your advice, or the advice of the sleep council, for someone who has got, because up until now we've been talking about, you know, generally people who are fit and well, but those people who are not well from a mental health point of view, or even from pain or other physical ailments, what's the advice for them?
No, absolutely. And I mean, sleep and mental health are really sort of, they go hand in hand, don't they? So we always, and sometimes it's hard to know which one's caused which, has a mental health issue caused the sleep issue, or was it not sleeping well, problems, difficulties around sleeping, and that's then actually, like you say, caused anxiety, or, led to any other kind of mental health issue. Our advice is always for the two of them to be treated at the same time. So ideally, you wouldn't go away and just treat the sleep issue first without looking at the mental health at the same time, because you could do all the right things and get the sleep back on track. But then if the mental health issue hasn't been sorted, the likelihood is those sleep patterns, those bad sleep patterns are just going to start again. And same on the other hand, we wouldn't want the mental health issue to be sorted first without actually trying to sort the sleep at the same time, because they just go so hand in hand together. It's to be honest, it always comes back to us, is coming back to that sleep hygiene, and keeping. It's about strengthening that body clock at the best. That's what we need to do more than anything else, is strengthen that body clock. And, the things around that are obviously keeping those regular hours, it's exercising, but doing it during, trying to not do it in that sort of 2-hour window before bed, and it's that light and dark. So we know that we know light is a huge factor in how well we sleep as well, and that's starts from almost the minute that you wake up, getting that light into your bedroom, getting those curtains open, even if you can get out and have a bit of a 30-minute walk first thing in the morning is really great for kind of suppressing your melatonin, but, boosting your energy and your mood as well. And then same, obviously, at the other end of the day, you want darkness. You don't want to be sat with, big bright lights on. You want to be off your screens, and all the things we can do to kind of strengthen, the circadian rhythm will help alongside other health conditions as well. So there's no quick fix sometimes, obviously, when there are lots of underlying maybe health conditions going on, but it's really important that people, because they might have a medical condition or they might be suffering with a mental health issue, don't just kind of give up on the sleep side of things because they think it won't work. I think that's really important, that the two things continue to work alongside each other, and so that we can continue to try and improve people's sleep.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that, and that's what we try to do. So it's just not tackling one thing, but trying to have a holistic picture of what the patient's day-to-day life is like, etc. And the snooze button. So I know definitely where the snooze button is without even opening my eyes. But what is is there any evidence out there that actually we get more rest by getting another 5 minutes of snoozing or 10 minutes of snoozing? What's the sleep council's views on that?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So we always tell people to avoid pressing the snooze button, and actually, if you need to get up at 7:30, get up at 7:30. Don't set your alarm for 7:10 and then press snooze for 10 minutes and then another 10 minutes, because really what happens is you never get back into proper sleep. Your body's almost already on alert, so it knows it's time to get up. So the ideal is just to set it for the time that you do need. Now, I'm going to say I've done it myself, do you know what I mean? But I do not do it on a regular basis. I couldn't tell you the last time I did do it. But there are occasions when it's okay to do it. But if it's something you're doing, literally morning after morning, I would just set it for the time you need to get up, because actually you're going to get much better sleep in that sort of 20 minutes than you are if you set it at 7:10, you snooze for 10 minutes, your body's kind of already on high alert. You don't really get any quality sleep at that point. You probably just literally, your eyes are just closing. And if you really do struggle, I would put the alarm clock on the other side of the room, so you actually have to get out of bed to turn it off or press the snooze. And actually by the time you've done that, you probably can't be bothered anyway to press snooze because you're awake, aren't you, at that point?
But also, if we've had a rested night's sleep and we are not particularly sleep deprived, therefore we might be struggling to open our eyes, the body's actual natural body clock is highly accurate, isn't it? So actually, if we're well rested and get a good night's sleep, we set the alarm for 7:30, our body's going to be naturally waking up at 25 past anyway, ready to get up.
Absolutely. And, the older that I've got, the more that even now at a weekend, obviously I don't set an alarm clock unless I'm actually, taking the kids somewhere or anything like that. But I naturally don't get up that much later anymore. And that's because I do keep fairly regular hours now. And actually you do become programmed then to just naturally wake up. And yes, it's much nicer to wake up without an alarm clock because you come round more gradually and it is nicer. But yeah, like you said, if you are getting your allocated sleep need overnight, then actually you should be able to get up pretty well in the morning. We all feel that initial grogginess, but generally by the time you've got out and you've got the shower going, most people are starting to feel absolutely fine. The best way to kind of determine if you're sleeping well or not is, I always go by how you feel by about 10 o'clock in the morning, 11 o'clock in the morning. And if you are still needing to fuel yourself with cups of coffee and tea to kind of get yourself through, then chances are you've not slept well. But most people, usually by 10 o'clock, they're sat at their desk or they're out at work, usually by that point feeling pretty sharp, thinking clearly, and are absolutely fine. But, yourself, when you've had a bad night's sleep, I do, and do need several cups of tea to kind of almost get me through the morning. So I would always say, look at that as to how well you're sleeping. Try not to get too hung up on the number of hours you sleep. We're not all the same. There isn't one size fits all. Some of us can function really well on 6.5 hours of sleep per night. And some of us, like me, need about 8.5 or so. It's really individual. So it's definitely looking at the quality of sleep rather than the quantity.
You say it's individual, but also there's a cut-off, isn't there? You said 6.5 there. Say when I do networking events, and I love asking the question, who gets 7 to 8 hours sleep, and I often actually then keep going down and embarrassing a few people, and there's still hands going up at 4 to 5 or maybe even lower. At some point I say any lower, and they just put their hand up. So that statistically those people are sleep deprived because there is this sort of freakish sleep condition where some people need very little sleep, isn't there? But the percentage of people that need it is so small that they're not in that room with me. Certainly not 6 of them at once out of 30 that put their hand up at 4 or 5 hours. So I always sort of challenge back on that you might need less, but you don't need that much less. And it's a bit like that whole adage of boiling a frog, isn't it? These people don't know they're sleep deprived because the fog that they've got is the normal for them. They don't realize that fog is not what everybody else has experienced because that's their normal. I
know, absolutely. And you're absolutely right there. It's just become the norm. And actually they don't realize how much better they could be performing or feeling or behaving if they were actually getting the sleep that they needed. There is obviously, like you said, lots of research out that obviously getting less than 6 hours on a regular basis is obviously not great for sort of things like Alzheimer's, obesity, type 2 diabetes, and heart disease and things like that. So it is something that people should really take seriously. And I think it's really difficult because I do understand that there are people with sleep issues and they feel like they've tried everything, and it's really about coming back to they need to sort of almost like challenge those behaviors and negative thoughts around sleep as well, because short-term insomnia might be okay with obviously sleeping pills and things like that, but obviously if you've been suffering for several months, some people several years, with long-term insomnia, the sleeping pills aren't actually going to get to the root of that problem, are they? You've got to tackle that root. And for some people, obviously, it's things like cognitive behavioral therapy for insomnia, where there's lots of like things around that, like sleep restriction and stimulus control and things like that, which people need to do. But unfortunately, it's not as accessible as we would like. But hopefully we'll get there one day.
Yeah, I think Gurpinder will fight for that. I think making it would I be correct in thinking, from my knowledge of it, making any kind of CBT referrals not that straightforward in the landscape at the moment?
Not at the moment, no. I mean, I think that with sleep, if we do feel that the patient needs a short-term supply of tablets, then that can be given. It's not advised long-term because it spoils their natural body clock. A lot of patients, I mean, at the current moment with the pandemic, they're not able to get to see a GP. So a lot of them are self-medicating with herbal remedies or over-the-counter remedies. And some of them find them quite useful, whether they're herbal teas or something like Nitol or something. And that's quite interesting as well. So, as long as it's used short-term, we are happy to prescribe in some select patients.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's a difficult one, isn't it? It's there are obviously, there's some real clear pathways, isn't there, for things like, obstructive sleep apnea and narcolepsy, those kind of sleep disorders. There are clinics that people can go to. But, we know that a large percentage of people's sleep issues are around, obviously, long-term insomnia. And that's the difficulty there, is that, sleep hygiene with the best will in the world isn't going to solve someone who's not slept well for several years. It should be used alongside other things, because it's really important that they do put these really good sort of principles into place. It's almost like you said, what we do over almost like a 24-hour period. It's not just that 1 hour before bed. It's what you eat and drink throughout the day. It's when you exercise. It's that light exposure and things like that. But yeah, it's, there's no quick fix, unfortunately.
Yeah. No, but as you said earlier, people fall out of the good habits as well, don't they? Because they kind of give up and they kind of abandon the good habits because they think, what's the difference?
Yeah.
I wasn't sleeping with or out with good habits, so I won't bother. I had a guy accost me I did a keynote at a sort of personal development type event in the evening, and they had a coffee break at 8:00. So obviously I didn't have coffee at 8:00 because I am very sensitive. I am a stop at midday coffee person. But this guy was stood there with a full cup of coffee and said, "Can I just have a chat with you?" He said, "Because I really is interested in what you had to say about sleep. And I've had long-term issues with sleep." He said, "What can I do?" And I said, "Well, to be honest, I'm not a sleep counsellor. I've given you some sort of tips and tricks, but I'm not a sleep counsellor. I suggest you see a sleep counsellor. I suggest you seek professional help via your doctor, or I can refer you to a sleep counsellor that I am aware of in the local area that might be able to help you." But I would look at some of the things I've talked about today about sleep hygiene, because you are sitting here at 8:00 in the evening drinking a cup of coffee. He said, "Yeah, I have about 8 cups a day." And I'm like, well, that may not fix the problem, but it's certainly not helping it. People just fall into the bad habits, don't they? And some of that might make a difference.
Absolutely. Sometimes some really simple changes can have a huge impact for some people. Like you say, just things like caffeine. It can be that screen time. It could be the light exposure and things like that, and those small things could actually make a huge difference. And like I said, it's just it's just that consistency that we need to sort of continue with as well. Like, we so easily give up when it comes to like holidays, and even like over Christmas, we know that we get a lull sort of over like the 6 week summer holidays and Christmas, because people do abandon kind of like the routines and things, and then we absolutely get inundated in January and September because people are like wanting to get either the kids sleep patterns back on track, or their own's gone completely haywire. So we are guilty of kind of not being consistent as well, and we're allowed to have a life and we're allowed to have fun. Do you know what I mean? But it's just being mindful, isn't it? Especially if you are someone whose sleep is quite fragile, and if you are a really good sleeper and you have got a lot of these really good sleep hygiene principles already in place, then chances are, like when you go on holiday or it's Christmas and things do go a little bit out of sync, then chances are, as soon as you stop that holiday, or we start back in January, everything kind of falls back into the way it was, because you've already got those really strong habits in place. But it's those people who are poor sleepers, like you say, who continue to then, just like you say, the habits get worse and worse and worse. That's when it becomes really difficult. And yeah, we've just got to look after our sleep. We've got to kind of safeguard it. So even if you are sleeping well, we always say to people, even if you're sleeping well, it doesn't hurt to kind of almost check in on your sleep every now and again. Am I actually still sleeping as well as I used to do? Do I still do this? Do I still do that? Or has bedtime got later, and what's the reason for that? Because actually it doesn't take it long for it to be broken. And so, and we know how important it is to obviously physical and mental well-being.
Yeah, and I think as part of this social prescribing, that NHS is really pushing for at the moment, I think sleep counsellors will definitely have a really important part to play in terms of educating, the patients, the population about the benefits of sleep and how to go about doing that. And I remember reading, I think it was a couple of years ago now, I think it was a University of Surrey. They did a study where they looked at even, down to the nitty-gritties of genetics, that if we don't get a good night's sleep, then our genetics in a simple way will change so that when we have more inflammation in our body, and as we know, inflammation then leads on to other diseases and pathways. And so it's just a very, very innate part of our human life, isn't it? A third of our day. So it's really, really important. Yeah, absolutely, drumming that across. I just wanted to ask you a question, if that's okay. So siestas, power naps and things, and some cultures, do that, quite regularly, and they stand by it. And what's the kind of current consensus about kind of siestas and power naps during the day?
Yeah, so I think, obviously, like in this country as well, we don't advocate power naps, do we, or siestas and things like that. But napping is not the devil. Do you know what I mean? And actually, a really good 20-minute power nap can be really beneficial for some people. Because of the way our sort of culture and the way we work at the moment, and we've got this whole kind of 9-to-5 thing going on, is that obviously that a power nap doesn't really, sit well with a lot of sort of employers and things like that. So we do have this sort of culture where, we just have this one period of sleep and it is overnight. So I think right now, if you are sleeping well and you are getting the hours of sleep you need overnight, you generally shouldn't need a power nap to get you through the day. However, if you've had an odd bad night here and there and you need that power nap to kind of get you through the day, then I think go for it. Do you know what I mean? They're really good at kind of just boosting that sort of energy and that alertness. We would always say a nap either needs to be sort of around 20 minutes long. So you only want to be in like stage 1, stage 2 sleep. You don't want to be getting into kind of deep sleep. Or you have a very long nap and it's like an hour and a half. So it's like a full sleep cycle. Because actually, if you kind of have 45 minutes and you wake up you set an alarm because you can only have 45 minutes because you've got to get back to work, and you wake up from deep sleep, you end up feeling worse than what you did before you had the nap. So 20 minutes is sufficient, really. I would say if anyone finds themselves having to nap every single day, then I would personally be looking at like what's going on with your nighttime sleep. And actually, if they turn around and they're still having eight hours of sleep a night and still needing to nap, I'd be wanting to just maybe widen, and look at some other things that might be going on. Because generally most people who were getting a good night's sleep, 7 to 8 hours, shouldn't really need a power nap as well. But they're not a bad thing, so they shouldn't be frowned upon. And I think, are really useful if, you've had a late night for whatever reason, or you've had a disturbed night because of kids or pets or anything like that, then having a power nap is a great idea rather than just trying to struggle on throughout the day to get to bedtime.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that, if someone's finding that they are sleeping a lot during the day regularly, even though they sleep well, then that would ring alarm bells for me anyway, in terms of obstructive sleep apnea, and whether the oxygen to the brain is cutting down every so often in their sleep cycle. So yeah, they should see a GP for that. Yeah,
definitely. Yeah.
Just a little secret I'll let you into. I don't think I've told you this before, Gurpinder. In order to make sure I get the best restorative night's sleep, because I'm a bad snorer and I'm a mouth breather, I take my mouth up at night with KT tape myself to breathe through my nose.
Gosh.
It really does help because, interestingly, I grew up having guitar and asthma and all those kind of things. So I always had a blocked nose. So I sort of, learned to breathe through my mouth. And my school teachers were always saying to my mum and dad at parents' evening, we just sit there with his mouth open all day. But I started doing that about 4 or 5 years ago. And I do it every night, and that kind of really helps me sleep. It's a habit that I've created that works for me. Because I'm forcing that nasal breathing that is better for us. I've tried to introduce that because there is some sort of content online about how to do it. But I've tried to introduce that to some of our students, and that's a step too far for them.
I'm not surprised.
Also frightens the life out of people in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
I do go for the skin colour one now. Rather than bright pink.
And I just wanted to kind of, 140, 150 years ago, before the advent of electricity, I'm sure, I'm not that old, but I'm sure that, humans were waking up to the sun. And some of especially my dad and my mum, they wake up to the sun, and they've always done that. So what's the advice on that if we're waking up with the sun? Because I've seen it on quite a few health blogs and things about waking up with the sun, the benefits of that. But is there any advice that the Sleep Charity would give with regards to waking up with the sun?
Well, obviously that's the natural way, isn't it? That's how, like you say, if you went back hundreds of years, that's how people slept. Like there wasn't alarm clocks, there wasn't electricity, there wasn't central heating and things like that. So, you woke when the sun rose, and you went to bed when the sun set. So you can imagine now, if we all went to bed when the sun set, we'd all be in bed at 4 o'clock, wouldn't we? If not a bit earlier the last couple of days. But,
and Netflix would be out of business.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. In fact, Netflix did say that sleep was its biggest competitor. Do you ever remember hearing that? So, but yeah, I think waking up with the light is one of the best things we can do. A lot of people really struggle at this time of year because of the darkness. We don't necessarily feel like we've got that same motivation to kind of get out of bed because it is so dark. And a lot of people do use things like light boxes to really help them in the morning. But I think it's a great way. I would only suggest that, I guess, when it comes to summer, they could be waking really early. And they might need a power nap then to kind of get through, unless they have a really early bedtime as well. But it's just how that factors into your lifestyle, isn't it? And that working day and things like that. In an ideal world, would be how we woke. We'd wake up with the light. We'd go to sleep when it was naturally dark. And actually, if you went back sort of 100 years, people did sleep actually in sort of almost stages, isn't it? I think it was like biphasic sleep and this polyphasic sleep and things like that. And people did have different chunks of sleep. They didn't just do it all in one, which is what we do these days. But that's kind of how, things have evolved over the years with things like electricity, central heating. They've changed the way our lifestyles are, and therefore have changed the way we sleep. So we do have this one chunk overnight. Problem is that just doesn't work for everybody, and that's why we've probably got some of the issues that we do as well, is that some people just really struggle to sleep for a huge block of time.
Excellent. Okay, Gurpinder, was there any more specific questions you wanted to ask around the sort of tips and advice area of sleep?
No, I think it's been a great session, I think.
Yeah,
thanks.
That's really helpful, thank you. So I'm going to close now with our two sort of final questions that we ask everybody. The first one, and for you in the area, or you in this, is a fairly obvious question and a fairly obvious answer, I think, but for some of our guests it's a little bit different, because we're all about energy. And that's how we frame, because we find that is a good way to talk to the client, because everybody wants a bit more energy, don't they? How do you think sleep gives you more energy? It's like I said, it's a pretty obvious question in this instance.
Well, obviously, when you sleep well, every area of your life's improved. So, you perform better, you behave better, you think better, you look better, and all of that links back to your energy. And, if you wake up well rested, you're better prepared for the day, you've got energy, you're alert, and what more do you want from that?
Excellent, great answer. And then the final one, if I had a magic wand, this is a typical coaching question that I got taught in my coaching training. If I had a magic wand that I could wave for you, what would be the one thing you would change? And can you answer that both personally for yourself and more societally?
Is that to do with sleep itself?
I think you could take that as broad as you like, but it'd probably be good to have it in the sort of sphere of sleep.
So one thing that I would change if I had a magic wand, I would make all technology switch off from 7 o'clock. So nobody could access technology from after 7 o'clock, because I think people would sleep so much better. And I'm going to go with that as a societal one. So as a society, if we all could switch off, we'd all sleep better. From a personal perspective, if I had a magic wand, what would I change? I think personally, I would just. Oh, that's a really good one, isn't it? Might have to change my answers now. Hang on a minute. Well, I think I'd say both. I'd say that for both the societal and myself. I think technology has such an impact not only on sleep but just on life generally. On relationships and friendships. On your mental well-being. I think technology has a lot to answer for. So if I had a magic wand, I would make it all turn off at 7 o'clock, so that people had to interact with their partners, they had to interact with their children. They couldn't scroll through social media looking at pictures of filtered celebrities and feel bad about themselves. And it would have a huge impact on people's sleep as well. It
would indeed. Good, great answer. Interestingly, I think a lot of German employers have been doing it for years, but it's now become a law in Europe, isn't it, for employers to turn their email systems off out of hours.
Yeah, and I've certainly noticed that more and more people having like their email signatures, just because I've sent my email at this time of night, do not feel you have to respond if you're on annual leave, or if it's an evening or early morning or anything like that. And I've noticed that that's sort of creeping in now, because I do know for some people, their working hours might be a little bit different because they've got children and things like that. But I do it myself. If I see an email at 7 o'clock, I do try and respond to it. And I know I shouldn't. And if I didn't have my phone to hand, I wouldn't have done, would I?
No.
And actually but then I start thinking about work like you would do. So I do think actually if we could all just, have phones and gadgets all taken off us from 7 o'clock and no access to the internet, it'd be great. We all go back to playing board games and, talking to each other.
We get back to Victorian Britain.
Yeah, there you go. We sit with the candles on as well, so we don't have to put the lights on. We can sit with a candle
without the poverty in the workhouses.
Yeah.
Excellent. Well, it's been lovely speaking to you, Lisa. Thank you so much for making time for us. I've really enjoyed it. Gurpinder, anything you want to add?
No, thank you very much, Lisa. It's been enjoyable.
No, thank you very much for inviting me and having me on.